I know it can feel discouraging if you're in that middle ground of, I haven't heard anything this cycle. Am I going to be reapplying? I don't know. Tonight we're doing Reapplicant check-in, and I expect that this will be a smaller group. Usually these sessions are, which I really enjoy. I feel like that gives us more of a chance to really deep dive into stuff and answer as many questions as possible. So that will be the goal tonight. Is I want to talk through what you should be doing and thinking about right now if you are thinking you'll be a reapplicant for next cycle, and then also how to evaluate your application, things that you can be looking for, and then again answering questions. And we can really get into specifics if y'all want to. So if you want to have your CASPA pulled up, your personal statement, anything that you want to go over, we totally can. We just launched our signups for Prepay Academy. So I don't know if any of you here were in Academy, but Academy is something we started last year, and it's group coaching. So we have live sessions 3 to 4 times a week with myself and other coaches and our TAs that you can join, and they are on topics to walk you through the application cycle. So we start in February and go through October. In February, we talk about personal statements, experience details, things that you need to be getting ready for your application when it opens in April. And then in April, we go through the application process together, and then we get into interview stuff for the end of the program. So we have Q&A sessions. You can submit things to get them edited. If you signed up for last year's Academy, if you are here and you were not accepted and you're looking at being a reapplicant, you will be able to roll into the next cycle. We'll send an email out about that shortly. So if you were in it last year and you didn't get in yet, you don't have to rejoin. A lot of what the participants from last year said was just that having the support and the accountability and people going through it together and going through the whole time, like it's different than one-on-one or these webinars where you don't really know people. You actually kind of get to know the people that you are going through the process with and being able to help them a little bit more. So it was great. I really enjoyed it. I think the people in it really enjoyed it. If you have any questions about it, feel free to email me. I'll be honest, we didn't turn off the Cyber Monday code. So if you want 50% off of it, that code was Cyber50. I just really want it to be accessible to people who want to join. You also get all of our books, the personal statement guide, interview guide, and prepay workbook, as well as all of the courses. The sessions are recorded so that you can watch them later if you can't attend them live. It's just a way to try to get you as much help as possible. So let's talk about the definition of what is considered a reapplicant first, because there can be some confusion around this. If you log into CASPA the very first time in April and you have done anything on your application, it will ask you if you want to pull your application forward. And if you do that, you'll be considered a reapplicant. Even if you've never submitted or there's a program that you've never submitted to, it will label you as that for CASPA purposes, but that does not mean that you are a reapplicant for a school. For you to be considered a reapplicant for a school, that means that you have previously submitted an application to that program. So if you're going into another cycle and some schools on your list you applied to before and you have some new schools, the old ones you'd be considered a reapplicant, the new ones you would be considered a first-time applicant. So that's a little differentiation there. To me, this doesn't necessarily matter that much. There may be schools that give more preference to reapplicants. We don't always know what that is. They're not really going to publicize that. I've had a few people who work with schools or admissions tell me we prefer people to apply here more than once. We want to make sure that they are dedicated to the profession and really want to go to our program. Doesn't really make sense to me, but if that's how they want to do it, whatever. And it would be nice if they told people that. But it's just not uncommon to have to reapply. And we'll go through some of the different sections here, but I know it can feel discouraging if you're in that middle ground of, I haven't heard anything this cycle. Am I going to be reapplying? I don't know. And to me, until you have an acceptance, until you have that guaranteed spot, you should proceed as if you are going to have to reapply. Try not to get discouraged. Try not to be too disheartened by that. Just take it as an opportunity to continue to better your application, get more experience, become more ready for when you do ultimately get in? A good question. I want to apply to one school just to get the hang of applying. I know I won't get in. Does it look bad if I reapply? Okay, so funny story. I was you, except for I was at the end of my junior year and I was like, okay, I'm not going to get in. I know I'm not going to get in. I'm just going to apply to see what happens, to kind of learn about the process. And I had this thing in my mind that I completely made up, and I don't know if it's true, but I thought in my head that if I did have to apply again as a reapplicant and the next year I looked better and I had gotten more experience and done more things, that I would have a better chance the next cycle because I was a second time applicant. That probably is not completely accurate, but in my head, that's what I thought. That being said, I applied and I did actually get into 2 schools. I was, again, fully expecting not to get in anywhere. My patient care hours were so low. So no, I don't think it looks bad. My stance has always been and will continue to be, if you feel ready to apply and you have met the minimums, go ahead and apply. I do think if you haven't met the minimums, which the 2 schools that I got rejected from, I didn't have enough experience for, I think in those cases, it's probably a waste of money to actually submit. You can see CASPA and look at CASPA and put everything in if you just want to get an idea of it without actually submitting. But I probably at this point would not submit an application that I felt was suboptimal, like not meeting the requirements that the schools were asking for. I think that can actually look a little bit lazy, like you didn't check the requirements, that you aren't in touch with kind of what they're looking for. Sorry I came late. When does the Pre-PA Academy start and run through, for how long, and what was the Cyber Monday code? The code is Cyber50. We can throw that in the chat. And then it will start in February and run through the end of October. I think that's 9 months. And then you'll still have the Facebook group. You can definitely still email, access stuff, but that's when we'll actually do sessions, is through that time period. And honestly, y'all, like if you prioritize going to sessions, there were so many I had where it was essentially like a one-on-one mock interview, just me with another person. So you can definitely get a lot out of it if you prioritize those sessions. There were multiple people that I did multiple one-on-one mock interviews with during the program, just because they're like the ones who showed up to the live sessions. Okay, how many patient care hours did I apply with? Like 150, not a lot. One school that I got into required a minimum of 100 hours, and the other one did not have a specific requirement. Okay, let me get back to my list real quick. The one thing I do want to encourage y'all to do, if you have submitted, and you may have already done this, but make sure that you've downloaded a copy of your application. So if you go to CASPA, you can download a PDF, and that will just be helpful to you to be able to go back and revisit. You don't want to get into the time period where CASPA kind of closes and then you're trying to download it and you can't. So go ahead and after you submit, go ahead and download that application just so you have that information. If you don't know how to do that, just Google CASP download PDF and it'll pop up with the FAQ and kind of walk you through it. So this next part will kind of go off of Rachel's question. She said, as someone who has applied twice now, has gotten interviews from last cycle and this current cycle, and has gotten waitlisted both years, what specific tips do you have? This is where we get into trying to figure out what the schools think. And we're never really going to completely know. A lot of this is kind of guessing, essentially. But what we're trying to figure out is, did they look at your application? So the first part of that is, did you get interviews or did you not get interviews? If you did get interviews, that is a fantastic sign. That is very difficult. Like, you should be very proud of yourself if you got to the point of getting interview invites. If we're thinking about schools getting 1,000, 2,000 applications and only interviewing a handful, like a few hundred people, if that tells me that your application met the requirements, that something stood out enough that they wanted to see you and talk to you and find out more about you, and that you applied early enough in the process that you were competitive compared to everyone else who was applying at the same time. So getting interviews is a great sign. If you didn't get interviews, that's when we have to figure out why. Why didn't you get interviews? And we'll go through what to look at on your application, but there was something that didn't click. whether it's requirements, essays. But if you didn't get an interview, we've got to back up in the process. Now, if you did get interviews, so like what you're asking about, and you got waitlisted or rejected, then that to me indicates something at the interview is not quite there. And just in doing mock interviews, especially with reapplicants, but with people in general, there's a few different reasons that could be. Red flags is a big one. In this process, it is so competitive now, and I hate to use that word. I hate to talk about the process being competitive, but when I say that, what I really mean is there are so many of you who are so well qualified. Like, you've done so much to get here, and you are what the schools are looking for. It is very, very small things that can make a difference in your acceptance. I have a good friend who still helps with interviews. I personally don't help at schools because I feel like that's a little bit of a conflict of an interest with working directly with applicants. But we were talking about it, and she was saying how basically the process where she interviews works is she has a list of people to meet with that day, and she'll do 15-minute interviews with them. And she doesn't really know much about them going in. She does not have their application. There are a few little notes about them that the school gives her, just kind of random stuff about the applicant. And then at the end of the day, she has to rank, like put them all on a list and rank them based on the interview and how it went. And essentially pick her top 3 that she would recommend for acceptance. And so when we talked about this, because that's tough, and she's talking to like 8 to 10 people a day when she's doing interviews, and essentially she was like, it comes down to somebody says one thing that makes me question whether they're ready for this, whether they can handle it, whether they really know what a PA is, if they're going to be a great addition to the profession. That can push them down on my list or make them somebody that I don't recommend. Specifically, she said she'll have people who seem like they really want to be a doctor or who don't really seem confident in what. So that's where when you're going into your interview, it may not take much for somebody to either feel like there's a red flag or something that is concerning. Or the other thing that I see in mock interviews is people just not really sharing enough about themselves. And that's something we really work on, is just opening up more, deep diving into your application and who you are, versus being more superficial. If I leave an interview or mock interview and I don't feel like I got a good sense of really who you are, that makes it harder for me to feel confident that you are ready to take this next step as a PA student and then into PA school and into the profession. So if you have had multiple cycles of getting waitlisted or rejected, at that point, I think you really, really need to work on your interview skills and figure out what could be going wrong. And that's working with friends and family, with PAs specifically, and maybe with somebody who doesn't know you to see what some of those concerns may be. The other thing I would recommend doing with any school that you've applied to that you've gotten either a waitlist or a rejection is ask them for feedback. Have y'all done this? Has anybody done this and had a good result? Some of them will not tell you anything. Some of them will either not respond, or they'll give you a very generic email that basically list out their requirements. But some schools will tell you what they want you to work on, and that is such valuable information. So Leanne said, got one interview and was told it went well, but feedback from all schools has been to increase science GPA. So we'll talk about how to do that. But if they're telling you, hey, you need to increase your science GPA, that means that should be where your primary focus is moving forward. Again, told this story before, but one of my best friends, Taylor, worked with me as a medical assistant for 5 years and then decided to go to PA school and now works in dermatology as well. But she interviewed at a school, was waitlisted, and they told her that she needed to increase her GRE score. So she interviewed like March, and they told her at the interview that she was on the wait list, needed to increase her GRE score. And she just put it off. She didn't want to do it and, was kind of discouraged a little bit. So she retook the GRE in June, got her score back in July, sent it to the school, and then was accepted. So like they told her what to fix. She did it and then she got accepted. So these schools, when they are telling you this, they're not just making stuff up. If they tell you something, giving you advice on what you can improve on. So reach out to them, email, and yeah, if they give you no response, that's tough. If there's no response at all, I probably would email one more time. Calling is probably not going to get you too far. I doubt they'd have your file right in front of them or anything, but I probably would do one more email follow-up and just see if they're willing to give you any advice at all. And if not, that's okay, move on. But if they do give you any indication, that can be really helpful. Yeah, so sometimes they'll refuse. Sometimes it's not helpful, but yeah, at least it's not going to take too much of your time to do it. So I think it is still worth doing. Should we wait for some time to ask for feedback, or is it okay to ask at this in the chat? If you have received a decision, so either a wait list or a rejection, I would go ahead and ask. I wouldn't wait any longer. They've made their decision, and then you can say, I'm still working towards this, or do you have any feedback on things I can improve on? On our website, on the PA platform, and I think if you just type in the PA platform email templates, you'll find it. There's a list of email templates that you can use. I would edit them and like make them your own, but it gives you a starting point so that you don't have to start from scratch with trying to come up with that too. Can we ask for feedback following a rejection without receiving an interview invite? Yeah, like 100%. Yes, definitely reach out and just see what they have to say. The worst thing that happens is they just don't respond and don't get back to you. Okay, so let's get into what a lot of you are asking about. What can I do differently? How do I actually make my application better? What steps practically should I be taking logistically? So the first part of that is looking at your application. And then the second part is the steps you actually need to take. So first things to ask yourself, if you're wondering why you didn't get accepted, why you didn't get an interview, why you got waitlisted, all of those things. The first question I always ask, like if we're doing a pre-PA counseling session or something, would be, when did you submit? When did you actually turn in your application? And if it was later in the cycle, why? What held you back from actually getting it in early? Was it something within your control, or was it something not within your control? Is it something that you could change for the next cycle? We talk about rolling admissions, and it really is so important. It's kind of like getting concert tickets. If you can get in at first, you're going to have so many more options of seats. But if you wait till the end and then you try to get them, there's no seats left. Like, then you just have less options. You just want to give yourself the best shot. And so part of that is getting your application in early. When do I think you should apply? If you've applied before, there shouldn't be as much that you have to do. So you can have your personal statement, your experience details, test scores, everything ready to go before the application opens. Plug it all in, update any coursework, update any experience, and get it submitted pretty quickly. Have your letter of recommendation writers ready to go, prep them about that you're going to be applying so that they get everything in promptly. That tends to be the biggest thing that holds up applications, is just waiting for the letters to come in. But if we start, that's something we emphasize in Academy a lot, is let's start in February, asking them, talking to them, trying to get them to get your letters in, or not sending them, but telling them you're going to want them in April. You can't send them before the application actually opens. That's the first thing, is when did you submit? And then the next thing I would be doing right now and starting with is just revisiting your school list, looking at where you applied and just double checking their website. If you did not get an interview, double check and make sure you met the prerequisites, that the courses you had fulfilled what they were looking for. Check expiration dates of courses, make sure the hours lined up. Check your experience, both the hours and the types, see what they require as far as shadowing, volunteering. Check deadlines, make sure you hit everything, check their letter of recommendations and that you had the right letter writers. You really just want to go down and check every single thing as much as you can to make sure you have the right prereq grades. There's so many different things and they're so different for each school. So going through each one can be helpful. So as you're doing that, you may find some things that you don't feel like you met for a school, or that you're unsure of. And if there's anything you're unsure of, reach out to the program and try to ask them about it. Throughout this process, do not assume anything. Don't assume that a course will be accepted or that it fulfills a prereq if it isn't exact. That gets people into a lot of trouble just because most of the time that's not the case, and they aren't going to just make something fit if it's not exactly what they want. Like, you can't assume that a biostatistics course will fulfill that's really hard for me right now, a statistics course requirement if they don't state that they accept that. That's a big one. I see AP courses get people into some issues when it comes to applying. I saw this with a medical assistant who worked in our office, and she had a psych AP credit, but on her transcript, it was not listed out. It just had like AP credits, 6 hours or something, but it didn't have the exact classes that she got credit for. And so all of the schools that had a psych requirement were automatically rejecting her because it didn't show that she had that, even if they did accept AP credit. But a lot of schools don't accept AP credit. So that can also be an issue there, is if you don't fulfill that. So again, we're not assuming. She also ran into an issue, that same person, that her biochem was taken at a school that was on the quarter system. And one of the schools she was applying to stated, and it was the tiniest asterisk thing at the bottom of the prereq page, which made me really mad, but that if your school offered a series, you had to take the whole thing, even if technically the ones you took fulfilled the hour requirement. So she had taken like biochem 1 and 2 at this school that was on a quarter system, so that should have fulfilled her biochem requirement, but because they offered a third section of it or whatever for a full year, because she didn't take that, they didn't accept it. It made no sense to me whatsoever, but that was why she was getting rejected from that school, is ultimately what we figured out. So checking all of that may give you some insight or kind of open your eyes to what you should work on or what you need to do right now. But let's get into some of like what can you be doing? What should you be doing? And again, that's what I see a lot of questions about right now. My first thing is just try to identify the weakest part of your application. And that may be something a school tells you, or that may be you kind of going through each of these sections and steps and trying to figure out what that is. We just, as people, have a tendency to want to work on and do the easier thing, which for this process is often getting experience, when a lot of times the weakest part of an application has to do with grades, and we don't really want to retake classes. We don't want to take new classes, but it may come down to that. It may come down to having to sign up for classes. So figure out the weakest part of your application, make it your priority to keep working on that. So maybe that's sign up for classes next semester. Online classes, I think, are more accepted now. I would just double check for the programs you're applying to that they're accepted. And oftentimes, if they're not prereq courses, they are more widely accepted. If it's a prereq or a lab course, those are often preferred that they happen in person. But check with the program just before you sign up to make sure. Getting more coursework can be helpful. Okay, so like somebody said, my cumulative GPA is around a 3.3, but I have so many credits now that any classes I may retake or add on does not make much of an impact on my GPA. And that's where it gets tough. This whole system seems to not really make sense, how you can only make your GPA lower and you can't ever get it back higher. Like, you can never get a 4.0 again. It's so dumb. But I wouldn't discount that. I would plug in, like, that should still meet the minimums. And the average for an accepted student generally now is still around just a 3.5. You'll see some schools that are higher. So if you're like, okay, I'm at a 3.3, I would check the program websites and see if you can tell what average they accept more often. So let's say they have a minimum, or like has no minimum GPA requirement, But when you look at their average of accepted students, I think their average is around like a 3.75. So clearly they care about grades. I guess they're leaving it open just in case they had some rogue person they wanted to submit. I'm not going to get into too much of the financial side of applications and the fact that schools make money off of applications. So in some cases, I think they want more applications, but that is not evidence-based. So I won't say that for sure. If you look at a school and they have a higher patient care hour average and a lower GPA average, you may feel like that's a better fit. So that's where we get into the next thing. What can you be doing right now when you're making your school list and you're trying to figure out where you want to apply? This is where you may also have to be flexible. So you may have to throw your net a little further, expand your reach, look at what you're prioritizing with programs and see if there's anything that you can move around a little bit. Are you willing to move? Are you willing to move a little bit further? What does that look like? That same medical assistant at my work I was talking about, so she actually got an interview, I guess it was last April. Yeah, last April she got an interview. Like asked her on, I think Monday for an interview on Friday, and it was virtual. She interviewed, and then the next week found out she got in, and then it was May because it was the end of April, and then the program started like end of May in a different state. And so she had to essentially up and move. And her story is kind of cool because it actually ended up being really good. Like it's closer to family for her. And then her husband had been looking at a training program kind of in that area, and he was able to get a job there and get into this training program. So it's going to work out. PA school is a very short time. We had a lot of people in my class who moved there, left family, left friends for a short period of time to come get school done and then go back to where they were from. So you've made sacrifices already in this application process of trying to become a PA, and those sacrifices will continue during PA school. And then once you're a PA and once you're in this great profession, hopefully you find a dream job and you don't have to sacrifice quite as much. But you may always be negotiating and giving something up to get something else. So I know that isn't probably what most people want to hear, but if you're going through this process and you're not getting the result you want, you may just want to look at more options and see if anything having to do with where you're applying is holding you back. Somebody asked if you needed to do a traditional post back. My take is typically not, or like not a structured program necessarily. My kind of order of coursework, if you're looking at doing more courses, is repeat any prereqs that have a C+ or lower and try to get those higher. Then take any recommended courses. So those are usually your like genetics and extra epidemiology stuff, whatever they recommend but don't require. Try to take those next. Those are going to be like upper level sciences usually. And then if you still have more classes to take, then just look at other upper level sciences. And this is where go to the CASPA subject list, and it will list out what counts as science, because there are a lot of courses that count that you may not consider. So those can be nutrition classes, public health classes. There's some kind of random things in there that count as science, but just keep in mind that it goes by the title of the course, not the subject. So if you sign up for a class that's, let's say, Public Health 101, but then the title is Psychology of Public Health, psychology classes are never science. So those will not help your science GPA. So if you are going to take extra classes, taking sciences and doing well will be kind of a double whammy, because it will help both your overall science GPA and your overall GPA. But yeah, check out the list, see what's offered, see what you can take. And you may find some things that are a little bit surprising that will actually count and help you, and may not be so hard. Like you're not having to sign up for crazy chemistries or anything. And you can take things that may be a little bit more interesting. When it comes to experience, one thing is looking at your experience and seeing what variety of experience you have, and seeing if there is a way that you can get new experience, new skills, learn something new that could be something different than what you're currently doing. And outside of patient care experience, can you beef up shadowing, volunteering, leadership, any other areas to really just make yourself a more well-rounded applicant? That was another thing that my friend Taylor, they told her, like, you don't have to quit your job, but they said, all of your experience in patient care is in dermatology, and we really think you should have some other experience. So I think she went and shadowed primary care, and they said shadowing was fine. But at that point, she was kind of looking at different jobs to see if there was a different area that she could get into. Because at some point, you're going to max out. Like, you're going to max out your skills and your knowledge in an area and feel like you've taken everything from that job that you can. And in those cases, moving on to something else can be helpful, just that you're continuing to grow as an applicant and as a student, as somebody who's learning new things. Okay, and then letters of recommendation. Somebody asked up here that if you could use the same letters of recommendation if you end up reapplying, and you can. That's up to you. I think I would just think about if your letter writers that you used previously are still the best people to write letters for you, if you are positive that they're writing you a great letter, a positive letter. If there's any question at all, I would start thinking about alternative letter writers. Letters are important. They can really show a program more about you, and the more personal they are, the more positive they are, the better. And if there's any question that you're not getting a letter that may fit those criteria, then you may want to see if there's anybody else who can. And then your essays, your personal statement, your supplementals, and these get tough as far as reapplying. If you didn't get an interview, the question is, did they read your essays? Did they even get to that part of your application? Or is there something before that that they said this isn't a good fit? If they gave you an interview, clearly they read it. So I do believe in at least editing, tweaking, revisiting your essays and your personal statement as a reapplicant, making sure that it still reflects the same things that you want it to reflect. And I think as a reapplicant, you may have different viewpoints, different perspectives that you want to share. Maybe you have new stories that are a better example of showing why you want to be a PA. And so I use an analogy of baking a cake, and how if you bake a cake and it's too dry or it's too sweet, you're not going to just use that exact same recipe again. You're going to tweak it. You're going to make a few changes, but ultimately you're still making a cake. So you're still applying to PA school. You still want to be a PA. Your main reasons for wanting to be a PA won't change, but those ingredients, those steps, the way you do things may have changed, and you want to emphasize that in your essay. And I don't think there's anything wrong with talking about reapplying. And when I'm reading a reapplicant's essay and editing it, I want to know what they've done since a previous cycle to improve. That is something that I'm looking for. So that gives you a few things to think about. There is a chapter in the personal statement book about reapplying and what to do with that too. And I think we have some stuff on our website, some videos on YouTube. So if you want specifics on essays, more, you can dive into that some too. Okay, that was most of what's on my list. I know we have a lot of questions. So let's try to, and I'm going to try to like them as I do them. Okay, I recently changed jobs. Would it be weird if I reached out to the PA at my old job who wrote me a letter last year and asked if they would resubmit? I left that job in November and want to keep that connection, but since I don't work with him anymore, do you think he would be willing? Yeah, for sure. I mean, I write letters all the time for people who worked with us previously. So if y'all had a good relationship, a good working relationship, and you felt like that was a great letter for you, that's totally appropriate. How many shadowing hours would you recommend one should apply with? This one's tough because every school uses shadowing differently, and most don't have a set requirement for it. So that's where my kind of go-to is at least 100 hours split between 3 different specialties or areas. So let's say you have, that's 100 hours. Some is in primary care, some is in outpatient, some is in the hospital, some is in dermatology or ortho. So you're getting to see PAs in all these different areas just to make sure that you have a full understanding of what they do. Our profession's so interesting. It's one of the things that we all call ourselves PAs, but me as a dermatology PA compared to an emergency medicine PA, our jobs look so different. So being able to really have a good understanding of that, that's the purpose of shadowing, is to make sure you know what the profession is. What stats do you consider competitive, like patient care, healthcare experience, volunteer, shadowing hours, GRE? I base everything off of the averages of students who matriculated into PA school. So PAEA publishes that data, and then most schools share their averages of their past accepted classes. So for me, those are the stats that I look at to see if somebody is a good fit. And that doesn't mean you have to be exactly mirroring those, but they give you a good idea of what the schools are looking for. Most of my PCE comes from being an RBT. I was wondering if I should continue with this. I got 500 hours being a CNA, but I didn't like the experience. I'm not sure if I should continue being RBT or try something else that counts as patient care. I've also been seeing RBT is not really seen as patient care, so it makes me hesitant on what to do. So that's behavioral therapy, I'm pretty sure. If I'm wrong, tell me. This is tough because it's so school dependent. So I would look at the school websites and see if they look for certain types of experience or anything specific. Some will say, like, we consider this more high quality, like EMT more high quality than CNA. So maybe they'll say that or say what counts for them. But my rule of thumb is when you're looking at a patient care experience job and you're trying to determine if it's something you should do or pursue or switch to, think about how involved you're going to be with the patients. And that's the goal for a higher quality patient care experience. It's something where you are making more decisions for the patients, helping them, more involved in their patient care. So the more that you can do that, the better. And that would be the goal, is that you're able to do more to help patients. So if you have an opportunity for that, keep looking for that and consider it at least. Should I apply once I'm done taking my post-bac courses, or should I apply while I'm in my post-bac? I've received mixed responses from schools. I think it depends on your application. As a reapplicant, I do think schools are looking to see improvement. So if you haven't finished any courses and you haven't really changed anything on your application, they may not look at it much differently than the first time. But if you've at least completed some courses and you're able to show that I'm doing well in these classes, I can handle a strong course load of difficult coursework, that could be beneficial to you. So it's a little bit of gray area. There's a lot of gray area in this whole PA school application process. So it is something you have to work through, but yeah, I think it would depend on a lot of factors there. All right. I am a first generation student. Is this something I should highlight in my personal statement, or is that not as important as other components? So that's interesting. That could fit in your personal statement, but I think where that would fit better now is the life experiences essay. That's something that they added last cycle, where you get to give some context to your application and explain your background, explain where you come from, and anything you want them to know about circumstances just surrounding your path of becoming a PA. So that would be a perfect place to discuss that and really talk about like how you have done as a student, how you have figured things out, your support, and where you come from. I did a master's in medical sciences after undergrad to improve my science GPA, but I applied with my grad GPA being pretty low, around 3.3. I'm planning on reapplying this year and have taken a couple extra classes in grad school to improve my grad science GPA to around a 3.5. Is that enough to help make me competitive? Would you advise that I take more classes, or will gain an MA job also help? Patient care experience right now is 1,200. So that's tough. So this, again, like, comes down to where you're applying and what they specifically are looking for. Most schools aren't going to, they want to see trends. They do want to see that improvement in your grad GPA, but most of them are still just looking at that overall science and that overall GPA. So those are the ones that you want to show that you're increasing and make sure you meet the minimums for. And then I look at those school averages to see, should you be focusing more on patient care experience or more on coursework, or does it need to be a little bit of a mix of both? What should I do if I'm post-grad and not taking any classes for a letter of from a professor? Should I ask a professor that I had a pretty good connection with, even though it was last year? Yeah, that's fine. So if it was something that you had previously that you feel like you are still in touch with that could write you a letter, that's great. So follow up on what we talked about earlier with interviewing and being waitlisted. So we got a little more context. If I have a lower science GPA, could that potentially be why they are waitlisting me post-interview? It's hard to tell if I'm being waitlisted due to my interview skills or if they revisit my application afterwards and decide to accept someone with a higher GPA, which could be happening. But if you have a lower GPA, but you still get an interview, that still tells me in interviews and multiple cycles that they want to talk to and you meet the minimums. It would be very, very important for you to go into the interview able to confidently show, despite GPA or any grades, that you're ready for PA school. So I don't know if you feel like that could be an issue of not maybe addressing the academic stuff directly. And sometimes you're not asked about it, but you have to find an opportunity to talk about it so that when they do revisit you and you're at a table with people talking and you come up, that someone can advocate for you who interviewed you and say like, oh no, I feel confident that she's fine. Like this grade doesn't scare me. This GPA doesn't scare me. We're good to go. So possibly, but we'll never know. But that would be something to work on in your interviews, is making sure that that's not something they have concerns about. Oh, when does the discount code expire? That's a great question. Whenever I decide to turn it off, but to be honest, I probably just won't. Does it reflect negatively to not write the life experiences essay? I don't think it reflects negatively. My take is that if you're given an opportunity on your application they give you a space for something, try to use it just because you don't have a lot of space to explain things. If you get the chance, then that can be helpful just to just helping them understand anything about you. Great question. If I join Pre-PA Academy and get accepted to PA school before the academy session start, is there a way to be refunded? Yes. So if you get off a wait list, we will refund you. So yeah, we love that. We had a couple of people that happened to last cycle. So yes, if you get off a wait list while you're in it, we can definitely do that. I've had such a hard time finding PAs to shadow. Any tips for reaching out to PAs and asking them about shadowing them? I've done YouTube videos about that. Use any personal connections you have, like even if they seem distant, even if they aren't super close connections, just tell everybody you want to be a PA and you'll be surprised who knows PAs. So use connections. Look for any programs around you, like hospital shadowing programs that they may have. When you're cold calling offices, like set aside some time to just call offices. Make sure they have PAs. Usually that's going to be on the websites now, but if not, you can ask. And then ask to leave a message for the office manager or talk to the office manager. You probably won't talk to them, but you can probably leave a message for them. Usually they're the ones who are fielding that. If you think about how the front desk or reception is more worried with patient check-in and they have a lot going on, phones are ringing, they don't care about you shadowing. So if you can talk to the office manager, they're the ones who are probably going to go to the PAs and ask if it's fine. The other thing I would say that I've been recommending more recently is get involved with your state society or AAPA. So like we have GAPA here, Georgia PA Association. I know Texas has a big one. California has a big one. There's the Florida Society of Derm PAs. Like find a PA society. They need help. And that's a great way to volunteer, but also to make connections with PAs who then potentially can help you find shadowing opportunities too. I have a 3.49 science GPA and a cumulative of 3.57 GPA. I've only gotten A's and B's, no C's. Great. The schools that I applied to have a minimum of 3.0 GPA in both. Should I be okay to not retake classes? That sounds promising. I mean, again, I would want to know like where you're applying and what their averages are and what your results were for last cycle and all of those things to really make a definitive call. But I wouldn't retake any classes. You could always take more classes, but that may not be the weakest part of your application. If you don't get in the cycle that you join Pre-PA Academy, do you have to rejoin and pay again for the following year? No. So if you don't get in, you can continue in the next cycle without paying again. Question here, I have a 3.48 overall GPA, 3.37 science, 300 volunteer hours, around 3,000 patient care hours. I applied for the first time this cycle and have not received any interviews or some areas I can improve on. So this is where it's tough. Like I can't tell you just based on your stats places to improve on. I can tell you the questions I have, which are when did you apply? What do the schools you applied to require? What were your actual grades? Was everything B or higher? What did the trends of your grades look like? What did your prereq grades look like? Did you have shadowing? What did your personal statement look like? It's just not black and white at all. There's so much to it that you can't really go off stats alone. Is online shadowing okay, or would schools see that as something negative versus in-person shadowing? From talking to programs, I think virtual shadowing is seen more as a personal enrichment than actual shadowing, because you're not really usually seeing that patient care. So in person is preferred, but if you have opportunities for virtual, that's fine. It's not going to replace in person. Do reapplicants normally have a better chance at getting in if you received an interview last cycle? That is debatable. At some schools, probably, if they prioritize reapplicants. You also have to think, though, that then you're going in with a new applicant pool. So there are no guarantees. And I've had people turn down acceptances thinking that the next cycle they'll get into the school that they were waitlisted at. And that's not always the case. It's tough to say definitively whether that's the case. Are shadowing hours more important than patient care hours? I would say no. Patient care is going to be more valuable. Is there a preference for online programs to retake classes from Portage, is one I've heard, versus a true university that offers online classes? I don't think there's any preference at all. A lot of people do Portage, UC Davis or USC. USC has an online one too. That's a popular one. The New England one is also popular. So there's lots of options. I would just go with whichever one makes the most sense for you. All right, I'm going to hop off and hope that I have a voice for tomorrow when I have to see my 30 patients or however many on my schedule. But thank you all for attending. I hope this was helpful. I would love to have some of you in Academy. Thank y'all for spending your Sunday night with me. Bye, guys.